The worst global economic crisis in 60 years. Credibility of governments and banks at stake. How will it affect you? The BBC World Debate, the global economy. Is it in shock? Welcome from me, Nick Gowing, to Davos in Switzerland at the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum. Among these mountains a year ago, the mood was overflowing wealth, cash and optimism, with better to come. A year later, the world's most important business and political leaders arrived here with crashing markets and fears of a US-led recession and losses of up to $500 billion, a massive figure. It's really hard for any of us to grasp. Then came the Bernanke bombshell from the chairman of the US Federal Reserve, an almost unprecedented 0.75% cut in US interest rates. So we ask, what global financial shocks face us all? Could it become a perfect storm of economic collapse? So, joining me here to try to make simple and to enlighten us all on what really is going on and what the impact of the new economic body blows could be, are leading global figures. I'm joined by Cheng, who's Vice Chairman of the Standing Committee in China's National People's Congress. Kumi Naidoo from South Africa, Co-Chair of the Global Call to Action Against Poverty Alliance. P. Chidambaram, who is Finance Minister of India. Ben Verweyen, Chief Executive of the global IT giant BT. Ndi Okereke Onyuke, Director General and Chief Executive of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. And John Snow, Treasury Secretary under President Bush for 3 years until 2006, now in private business. We need expert analysis as well to prime us on what we need to understand and identify in the current critical issues, the core crisis issues and the potential new body blows. For that, we will turn to headline thoughts. For that, we go to Kenneth Rogoff, who is Professor of Economics and Public Policy at Harvard University. Kishore Mahbubani from Singapore, where he served as ambassador to the United Nations. You're now Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And first, Jacob Frankel, an economist, former governor of the Bank of Israel, served at the International Monetary Fund, currently Vice Chairman of the financial services giant American International Group, AIG. Jacob Frankel, first, your 2-minute take, please, on whether a second financial market shock is about to hit the US and whether the dollar will keep falling.
We are talking about the perfect storm. And like all passengers on a vessel or on a boat, if we want to ask ourselves, what is the danger that we face? The dollar has declined already very significantly, and it has started to provide the adjustment, and export of the US has grown. So what is the fundamental imbalance in the world? And this is as of before the current eruption. It is the measure of the strength of the vessel. The fundamental imbalance today in the world, and it has been the same for the past few years, is great disparities in saving behavior. The United States is saving about 10% of its income. China is saving more than 50% of its income. Other countries in Asia are also saving a lot. As long as the large saving disparity between the US and China, for example, as long as this is not changed, we will continue to have current account imbalances. Against this background, when the recent storm erupted, we have discovered a lot of important vulnerabilities. There was a big excess in the US market. Housing has overextended itself. Mortgages were given to families that were not entitled to get mortgages. No documentation mortgages, teaser rates, all of these kind of things created a time bomb. And indeed, when house prices declined, and there is still a way to go, and the adjustment will need still at least into 2009, a lot of balance sheets, in particular of banks, have declined. You needed to cut credit, and the credit crunch came to the fore. How it's going to work out through the system, maybe we can have more to tell, but this is the financial vulnerability that took place. There are issues, rating agencies and the like, but that's the background.
Jacob Frankel, thank you. Let's get the reaction. China, Cheng, your view as Vice Chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. What level of apprehension do you have in your country about what's happening in America and the dollar?
Well, I'm a prudent optimist. So I believe the United States as the largest economic entity, they still have a deep impact in the world economy. But I think the U.S. economy will slow down, but not crash.
Not a recession.
Not recession. You know, I guess the growth rate for 2008 for the United States maybe will from 1.5 to 2.8.
P. Chidambaram, Finance Minister of India, you keep telling us that things are looking so good in India. 10% growth predicted by your Prime Minister a few weeks ago. And all the figures, all the fundamentals look great at the moment. Are you looking at America with apprehension, particularly your linkage to the dollar?
Yes and no. I mean, we don't think that America will go into a recession. Growth will slow down. But I think the American economy is resilient, innovative, and knowledge-based. Therefore, they can bounce back. In the short run, we may find some moderation in our exports to the US. A weakening dollar may, I don't know, may increase the capital inflows into India. Those are problems that we'll have to handle ourselves. And we think we can handle them.
Ndi Okoreke Onyuke, as Director General of the Nigerian Stock Exchange, do you look across the Atlantic and feel that you're going to catch a cold, you're going to get some kind of infection, or do you feel your economy is resilient?
Well, I believe strongly that the Nigerian economy is quite resilient. The US economy is well structured. I don't foresee a serious recession there. And we denominate our exports in US dollars also, especially our oil and gas. But all the same, we do not believe we are going to catch a cold. However, what we are seeing now in the global trend of markets going down and the dollar losing its value is beneficial to us because the markets in Nigeria and some other African countries are moving higher up when the world is coming down. We are going up. I think what is happening in the US and the developed world is like a blessing for us in Africa because the major investors in the developed world are now looking at us. We used to ask them to look at us, but now we don't have to ask them. They are coming in their large numbers. So we don't mind the temporary recession in the US. It's good for Africa.
Right. I don't sense any voices of dread yet from three big emerging economies. John Snow, if you were still Treasury Secretary, would you be believing that a recession is around the corner, 2 quarters with falling output?
I've gone to a lot of these panels here, and if you listen to the panels at Davos, you'd jump off the nearest tower.
How many people have jumped?
But I think there's way too much doom and gloom, and I agree with Mr.
How many people do you know who've jumped off a tower here in the last 3 days?
Well, if there were towers tall enough, I think they'd find them. There's a lot of pessimism here. I think it's misplaced. I think the comments you've just heard, I think our lead speaker framed the issue well. The remarkable thing is not that an economy will sometimes go down, but that the adjustment processes are allowed to work. Housing, it's coming down. We had too much housing, it's coming down. Consumption was too high in the United States, consumption is being reduced. Savings were too low in the United States, they're coming up. We issued a lot of bad paper. What's happening to the bad paper? It's getting written down. A lot of CEOs have disappeared from institutions that issued that paper. I think the really remarkable thing here is how rapid and effective the adjustment is to the prior excesses.
Ben Verweyen, you run an enormous corporation with interests right around the world, or at least in most markets. You rely on a large number of people with disposable income, as well as business people, to contract with you for a mobile phone or telephony. Do you fear that there's going to be a contraction coming?
I have to say that I'm rather surprised about the language used here in Davos. And the media have a tendency to use even more ebullient language to describe what's happening. I don't see a perfect storm at all. I think there are 3 underlying strengths in the economy that we didn't have before. First of all, the rate of innovation is higher than ever before. Second, globalization means that the linkage between the intellectual property around the world is better organized than ever before. And thirdly, there's a new capability to develop markets around the world. So I think that if you look to the problem itself, it has two phases. One phase is the financial services industry. And they have to do what John just said, and that is painful, and we all understand it, and it has its effect on the rest of us. But there's the other part of the economy, 2 feet on the ground, and nothing has changed dramatically between January and today.
Kumi Naidu, you're here really representing the poor, the Global Alliance Against Poverty. When you hear this, beforehand you were indicating you were deeply concerned about jobs, about the prospects for 1 billion people on $1 a day. Do you feel a little more heartened that maybe it's not going to be so bad?
Well, Nick, the perspective that is taken so far is that in fact the global economy is actually working well, and we are worried about whether a storm is coming. For most poor people in the world today, that is not the reality. What we have is that there are 50,000 people dying every single day from preventable causes. Yes, there might be growth in conventional terms, but we have to begin to question the quality of growth. Most of this growth is growth without equity. Most of this growth is jobless growth. My friend, the ILO Director General, who is seated here, will tell you that you cannot address the question of addressing poverty, addressing peace and so on without creating an economy that can deliver decent jobs to large numbers of people. And the reality is that what we are concerned about in the developing world is that this so-called global downturn or recession is not used as an excuse by rich countries not to deliver on their long-delayed promises to address the questions of particularly trade justice and ensure that we have a global trading system. And here I want to make an appeal to those with power at Davos to ensure that the Doha Development Round gets moving and to deliver a decent global trading system.
Mr. Chidambaram from India, do you sense that this may be used as cover by the developed world to do that kind of thing that we've just heard from Kumi Naidu?
Well, I don't know what the developed world will do, but certainly a developing country like India, we are not unmindful of the fact that growth must be inclusive. We didn't discuss that in your first round, and I'm glad that he's raised this issue. We believe in inclusive growth, but growth gives you a chance for equity. Without growth, there is no chance for equity. So the imperative is growth. With growth, you have the resources, you have the human resources, you have the capacity to spend more on education, healthcare, drinking water, sanitation, rural connectivity, and that's precisely what we are doing in a developing country like India. If the developed world selfishly or foolishly turns its face against inclusive growth, that's their fault, and I hope they won't do that. But as a developing country, we are very conscious that our goal is inclusive growth.
We're going to talk about that in emerging economies, but can I ask all of you, the credibility of central bankers, the figures that have been going around recently, including from the chairman of the Fed, Ben Bernanke, in Congress 10 days ago, before he made the announcement of the rate drop, was that there could be up to $500 billion worth of losses. These are extraordinary figures. Should people like us, who don't really understand this, be shaking in our boots? John Snow.
No, I don't think we should be shaking in our boots. I think we should though, be critical of the system that allowed those excesses to be undertaken.
Will the system learn from this? Will the bankers learn from it?
I think the learning process is now well along. The bad notes, the bad debts, the bad borrowing is being written off, and new and more strict lending practices are being put in place. We developed in the United States a new phenomenon over the last 4 or 5 years called liar loans. Now, a liar loan was a situation where the borrower lied and the bank was complicit and didn't really check. We got too loose in our lending practices. That's being corrected now. The regulatory authorities are stepping in to the breach, and I think the system is being mended. It needs to be mended. Jacob talked about the need for a good ship. He talked about the need for a good vessel. We also need good captains. And I think the captains have learned some lessons here as well.
Ken Rogoff, I know you wanted to intervene. I'm going to ask you to do the next stage of the map, which is about oil prices and commodity prices. But one quick intervention on this issue of recession, downturn, calibrate it somehow for us.
Well, I hate to spoil the party, but I mean, I think I have a much more negative view of what's going on. This central scenario Jacob laid out is very reasonable to me, but when he said vessel, I'm thinking Titanic. When he talked about the financial system, I'm thinking iceberg. We're looking at a situation where the plumbing of the U.S. economy is in deeply damaged, and precisely because of the lack of transparency, it's not going to sort itself out quickly, and it is a long window of vulnerability. I'm quite nervous.
So when George Soros, the hedge fund financier, says this is the worst crisis in the world economy for 60 years, do you buy into that?
It's a possibility. It's a distinct possibility, but we're not there yet. But we really should worry about it. I would not be particularly sanguine right now.
Right. Let's see what else we have to worry about. Ken Rogoff, your 2 minutes on oil commodity prices, which way they're going. Oil went up to $100. It's now down to around $87, $88.
Well, the first thing to say is that we've lived in an era with a fantastic rise in commodity prices, such as we haven't seen in a long, long time. It's coming largely driven by a great global economy, by China, India, Africa, Latin America, tremendous demand, not just oil, not just gold, even things like milk. The Chinese, the Indians didn't used to consume milk, and now they are, and it's bidding up the price. But I have to tell you, if at the end of next year we see prices a little higher than now, we see this trend continue, I would feel greatly relieved about the global economy because it means that everything's continued. If we instead have a bit of a slowdown, I think we could see commodity prices fall quite a bit. I would add to that, if you look at the longer trend, as this graph shows, of what's happened to commodity prices, this goes from, I'm an academic, 1862 to 2000. It's very volatile. This is commodity prices, an index, but it's trended down for a long time, until very recently. And I think at some point, that trend will reassert itself. Why does it trend down? It trends down because of technology. We constantly invent new ways to find oil, to find metals. So looking ahead, I don't think we're going to see a continuation of this, and of this bull run in commodities, and I would be very happy if you told me it was. I mean, there are distributional issues, certainly, within the poor, some of whom lose by this, and I don't want to dismiss that lightly, and they need to be dealt with. But I think for the global economy, if commodity prices are up next year, we can breathe a sigh of relief.
Mr. Chidambaram, you have a large number of poor people still in your country. Your country is moving ahead very quickly, but you subsidize fuel, you subsidize energy. How long can your government and you at the Finance Ministry keep doing that?
Well, I think prices at $100 a barrel are outrageous. And I think it's one way of impoverishing developing countries. Having said that, we cannot pass through fully the price increase to our people. One, we'll push them into misery. And two, a lot of economic activity in rural India will come to a grinding halt if petrol and diesel prices are priced reflecting $100 a barrel.
So what do you do?
So we have to subsidize. We have to subsidize partly through preempting tax revenues, partly by shifting the burden to upstream companies, and partly by taking a hit on the balance sheet of oil companies. We cannot pass through fully prices at $100 a barrel.
You are benefiting from the high oil price. You're a major oil producer. Explain to us and highlight for us the contradictions as an emerging economy profiting from $100 a barrel. Do you feel guilty in Nigeria profiting from $100 a barrel when we hear the kind of impact it's likely to make?
We certainly don't feel guilty at all. We like it, but even though...
Well, what do you say to Mr. Chidambaram, who faces this dilemma of how much to subsidize oil in his country for the poor people?
Oh, we subsidize too. and we help other poorer African countries. We haven't reached India because we believe that the larger economies do help India a lot. Or we subsidize for Nigerians and also for Ghanaians and other African countries who buy from Nigeria. But for us, we know it is temporary. In fact, this year's budget was, the benchmark was reduced to $60.
You think this is temporary, do you?
We think it's that price is temporary. And we have to take advantage of it while it lasts. Because we believe now that the Americans have come to their senses to consume less. They overspend, they overconsume. Okay, they buy things they're not supposed to buy, things they don't need. Okay, they just want all the time. So if they decide to consume too much, we should get benefit of it.
Well, let me check. John Snow, do you think the Americans have come to their senses on consumption of energy, which in the Nigerian analysis is leading to a reduction in the price?
I think we're coming to our senses.
What does that mean in America?
If you look at GDP, energy today is only half of what it was as $1 of GDP from 20 or 25 years ago. We're slowly coming to our senses. You know, your former great prime minister said about America, they always get it right after they've exhausted every other possibility.
I think a lot of people still say that, if I may say.
Well, we're exhausting those possibilities and we're coming to our senses. No, the Congress just enacted some major legislation to encourage energy consumption. The best source of energy consumption is what? Higher prices. And higher prices leads to two things: reduction in consumption and incentives to go find other kinds of energy. That's happening, and my prediction is, I think others would share it, that America's consumption habits are changing. We're going to move to electric cars. We're going to make ourselves less dependent on traditional BTUs. And I think you're absolutely right to prepare for that day, because it's clearly coming.
So the good news may be that maybe the US didn't want to sign Kyoto or other agreements, but the $100 will give them the same incentives to go and do the stuff that we need for global warming. Because one of the most amazing things I find here in Davos this year is that whole subject seems to have disappeared.
Kumi Naidu, when we hear about the dilemmas for the Indian government, the largest democracy in the world, and obviously politicians are answerable when it comes to issues like energy, the rupee in your pocket or whichever currency it is, how do you assess the real challenge now for poor people who need it for cooking oil, who need it for getting around on their mopeds?
Well, in Mumbai, for example, in this informal squatter settlements, every single drop of oil is being measured in terms of how people are trying to survive. We need to recognize that already the poor have taken a huge hit in terms of food prices. In Brazil, beans has gone up 100%. Throughout Africa, we are seeing prices of food rising beyond the affordability of people. I wanted to just make one distinction. I think the American people are coming to their senses, but I think the current American government still has to come to its senses around thinking about consumption and the linkage to the question of, for example, climate change. And what we are, for example, the stimulus package that is being put forward right now by the administration is probably necessary. However, we have to be very clear about two things. One, it's a Band-Aid. It's not asking ourselves what were the regulatory deficits that actually got us to this point and how do we actually prevent it. And secondly, it's driven by a message of consumption. Right? It's saying, here's some money, go spend, 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 spend. And one of the big problems we got is that there is an overconsumption in rich countries. To give you one powerful statistic, what the Western Europe and North America spends on pet food annually would provide the entire African continent with 3 nutritional meals a day. Now, I've got nothing against pets, but I got a lot against inequality. And unless we begin to address the imbalances between rich countries and poor countries, we might get the stimulus package and sort it out for the next 2 years, but we'll hit the same problem a couple of years down the line.
Ken Rogoff, there you heard from Nigeria the prospect of $60 a barrel. Do you consider that that is likely if there's a slowdown in the economy, but with the enormous rapacious demand from emerging economies like China?
No, I think that is quite possible that we'll have that next year as things slow down. I wanted to just emphasize this inequality point. That's not just across countries, it's within countries, within China, within the United States. That is a huge problem that has accelerated during this recent period that needs to be addressed.
Jacob Frankel, let's move on with a third quick 2-minute presentation on the concerns about the emerging economies, and whether there's going to be some dramatic bubble bursting there.
Well, to begin with, I think that emerging economies' growth is not a bubble. They have a healthy demography, young population. When we talk about the long-term discussions, I will indicate probably where there are challenges there, but their economic growth is not a bubble. If you ask yourself, what does it take to be a successful emerging market, graduating into becoming a newly industrialized and ultimately industrialized, they are on the right road. There is one important challenge that I want to say, which has to do with protectionism. The best way that the industrial world can contribute to the continuing economic development of developing and emerging economies is to open their markets towards the products of these economies. Of course, it's a two-way street. We would like some of the emerging economies to deregulate and allow some greater introduction of activities from the industrial countries. But the important point of the open trading system has to be against our eyes, because there is nobody that will suffer more from protecting the producers in the industrial world than the poor countries. Let me say one more word about China. China has been growing, obviously, in an extraordinary rate, 11.5%. Many say that China should slow down its growth. I agree that China probably growth should be lower, but I just want to caution that if China slows down its growth, China will also reduce its demand for the exports from the rest of Asia, because much of China's growth is with the aid of resources imported from the rest of Asia. Asia may implode, and so be careful so that your wishes will not come true. And finally, the saving rate. There is no question that China's saving rate is just too high for its own health. And I would suggest that the development of a pension system, the development of a social security system, the development of financial markets that will enable families to secure their future while continuing their consumption will be for the benefit of all.
Thank you, Jacob. Cheng Siwei, this time last year, you created quite a ripple around the world when you did question whether the Chinese economy was a bubble about to burst, and the markets fell 5%. What would you like to tell us today about the bubble in China?
Well, actually, from December last year to October this year, China's stock market really has a big booming, 3 times growth, 300% growth. But it's really, as I said, there are bubbles inside. And now I think we are going to the reasonable price now.
What about those who say this is a serious political management problem for China if the bubble were to burst?
I don't think so. Actually, I think, in my theory, the stock market is a fictitious economy. It has bubbles inside. So the expanding and exploding of the bubble makes the market fluctuate. But from long-range view, they are still proceed as the waves and increase along a spiral roll. So don't be panic. Life is not always pink. If you use your own money to invest, that there's no problem. Don't borrow the money to invest in stock market. That's what I said to the people.
Mr. Chidambaram, as Finance Minister for India, you have said our economy is very different from some developed economies which are facing some stress. Why is your economy so different, which allows you to feel relatively optimistic?
Firstly, the two drivers of India's economic growth are investment, closely followed by domestic consumption. There's an investment boom in India today. Our savings rate is over 35% of GDP. Investment is a good percentage point above that rate. We attract large doses of FDI, and we don't suppress domestic consumption. These two drivers are not impacted by what's happening in the rest of the world. And I think these two drivers will continue to drive India's economic growth. Export is another driver. To some extent, a moderation in exports will affect growth. But if 8.9% growth moderates to, say, 8.5, that is still acceptable.
What about the view in Nigeria on overheating? Can you help us understand how your economy, according to the World Bank, can remain relatively resilient compared to what's happening in the developed world?
There is a lot of demand, and as long as there is demand, the economy will be resilient. And we also recently, because of the introduction of some economic policies by government, we have big banks now. We used to have banks with a low capitalization, but a lot of our banks, about 8 of our banks now, out of the 25 banks we have, are ranking among the, among the top 500 in Africa and top 1,000 banks in the world. So the banks are now able to finance infrastructure, and similar to what the Chinese politician said, we also enlighten our people not to borrow too much money from the bank to invest in the stock market. So we don't see much bubble because people are investing from their savings. So even if they lose, there won't be under any pressure to pay back. The few people that borrow from the banks to buy stocks in the stock market are those that already have, and they believe that they should use other people's money to work for themselves.
You used to work in the New York Stock Exchange.
Yes.
Do you think your prospects in Nigeria, you'd prefer to be there than in Wall Street at the moment?
Right now, yes, I prefer to be in Nigeria than Wall Street. But most of the time, I want to bring Wall Street into Nigeria.
Right.
Because I think I spent a lot of time and my brain and energies helping to develop Wall Street. And I think Wall Street should come now and help me to develop my own.
Kuminaidu, are you reassured by this? We know your concerns, but the emerging economies are the economies which are going to raise the income of the billion in India, who are, or no, not the billion in India, but the billion around the world who are on $1 a day or less.
I still remain concerned, but on a lighter note, let me say 20, 30 years ago, India and China were sort of seen as the objects of the generosity and the philanthropy of the rich countries. And now suddenly when they get up on their feet, the rich countries are, oh my God, they're coming at us, it's a big problem, what do we do? And that mentality, I think, needs to change. But the one specific concern in the way you pose the question about people who are investing in stock markets, both in rich and poor countries, we must be very clear to make a distinction here between active investment and passive investment. Those that buy shares, they of course are taking risks, they are vulnerable. Don't forget though, a lot of working people are invested in pension funds in various, which are then invested in the stock markets, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in developing countries and so on, where they have not necessarily, they might have just contributed to a pension fund at work, but have not had a direct say into where that pension fund then invests its money. I am deeply concerned that if there is a major stock market crash and so on, the impact on ordinary people in rich and poor countries will be much more devastating than we've ever had in the past, because the larger volumes of people are actually now, whether through direct investments or indirect investments. And that's why I think the challenge to political leadership is to ensure that we have transparent rules, we have the appropriate level of regulation. We cannot abdicate, political leadership should not leave everything to a nebulous market. There has to be a right balance between the push for liberalization on the one hand and the appropriate level of regulation on the other.
Kishore Mahbubani, you've been very patient, Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore. You're here because in this environment in Davos, we've heard a lot of people saying the center of gravity is shifting east relentlessly. And you're about to publish a book, The Irresistible Shift of Global Power to the East. Your 2 minutes, what's happening?
Here it's remarkable how few people have noticed that we are entering a completely new era of world history. It's the end of Western domination of world history, the rise of Asia. One simple statistic that we have all heard over and over, the Goldman Sachs BRICS studies that says that by 2050, the 4 largest economies will be number 1, China, number 2, United States of America, number 3, India, number 4, Japan. And everyone thinks this is unusual. But it's important to remember that from the year 1 to the year 1820, as the British historian said, the 2 largest economies were always China and India. So we're going back to the norm. But what most people have not grasped is the scale and pace at which it is happening. Which is in the Industrial Revolution in Europe, when you saw this rapid increase in living standards, you saw an increase of 50% in one lifetime. In Asia today, which is, I guess, is having his own version of the Industrial Revolution, in one lifetime, you are going to see not a 50%, not 100%, not 200%, but a 10,000% increase in living standards. Now that's an amazing statistic. In 1997, there were 20 Bloomberg terminals in India. By 2006, there were 1,600. And last year, they went up to 2,500. That shows the scale of increase of the middle class in India. With the shift of power in Asia, it's clear that it is in the world's interest to begin to realize that the G8 is a sunset organization, that you've got to change. And if you want the Asian countries to become responsible stakeholders, and they all want to become responsible stakeholders, they are the biggest beneficiaries of the current global order. They want to come and be partners with the rest of the world.
John Snow, the end of Western domination, if you were still Treasury Secretary, would you be sitting in your department saying things are shifting big time?
Oh, they are shifting big time, and it's for the better. And it's for the better of the United States, and it's for the better of Western Europe, as well as for the betterment of the world. I agree, Kishore, with you 100%. I remember going to the first meeting. Elvin, you remember this. Went to the first meeting of the G7. The subject before the agenda was global trade. The subject before on the agenda was global growth. The subject on the agenda was savings and investment imbalances. And I looked around the room, and here are our friends from Canada and Japan and Europe, and they don't count that much when it comes to the global imbalances, to the trade flows, and to growth. And I asked myself, where's India? Where's China? You know, where are the BRICS? Where's South Africa? And you'll recall that when I got the chance to be the chairman of the G7, we invited you in, and Minister Jin and counterparts. Because the truth of the matter is, Kishore, you're absolutely right. You cannot discuss the globe anymore from the point of view of the G7 alone. It's a sterile conversation. You need to have the other people in.
Economic power shifting, Ben Verveyen, is that how you see it as a major, as an executive of a major corporation globally?
I have a problem with the word power. I don't know what power means. What I see is inclusion. I truly see inclusion, and I see global companies, wherever they may headquartered, they have the tendency to go global. I mean, we will have Indian brands and Chinese brands already very successful around the globe. And what they do is, they do what other companies do also very well. They choose markets, they choose talents, and they want to work on a global basis. Now, I understand that that translates also in political power. And that translation of political power will put a lot of emphasis on structure, on transparency, on institutions that we can rely on. But I think those two things go hand in hand. I think it is great news.
Do you agree with Professor Mahbubani?
Well, as a prudent optimist, I have a little reservation for that. I think the shift will happen, but it will take a longer time. The reason is, according to my theory, there are 4 levels in development. First, exporting primary goods. Second, exporting manufacturing goods. Third, exporting capital. Fourth, exporting knowledge. So we are, China and India now is just in the second level. So we still have a long way to go.
Well, okay, let me press you. Do you see some of your reserves being shifted out of dollars because of this shift of power?
I don't answer this question.
But that's about financial power.
Because I was blamed for what I said. We need to compensate the loss of weak currency by the gain of the strong currency. I said this in the International Financial Forum in Beijing in November. And people blame me for the dropping of the dollar. I don't want to say this anymore, especially.
Finance Minister Chidambaram, do you detect this shift? Do you see this shift? Or are you going to be rather humble about it?
I see the shift, but I don't think it will be a dramatic shift that takes place within a short time. I think countries which control capital, intellectual property, and knowledge-based societies will continue to have an upper hand. And
you mean by that America, do you?
The US and several countries in the developed world,
yes, and
Germany. The great universities are in the West. The best minds migrate to the West. The best opportunities for innovation and research are still available in the West. So China and India have some way to go before we catch up. But we will catch up. 60% of the world's output came from China and India until 1820, the point which Kishore was mentioning. 200 years later, by 2020 also, 60% of the world's output will come from India and China. That's good, but that doesn't mean power will shift to China and India in the next 10 years or 15 years. But we will catch up with the West, and we will seek our place along with the other powers of the world.
What he's saying is that the equation has changed. Those people that fought the World War, some of us were not even born at that time, 45, sitting there every day deciding the future of the world. Now that we have emerging powers also, there's nothing wrong with those powers being incorporated. There's no reason why China and India should not be in the Security Council, and at least one country from Africa, because a lot has changed. And if the 7 Western world just sit there, permanent seats, it means that they will only think of what is best for you. The only way they can determine what is best for me is if I'm there to tell them where they should pitch. So I agree with him. This Davos is a very powerful gathering of the world. And we should take advantage of it and say so. So I agree that we have to look at this Security Council. I worked in the UN before I went to work in the New York Stock Exchange. So I know what goes on there. So we have to expand. I'm not saying that those 7 countries should leave the table. No. There should at least be 10. Incorporate 3 more.
John Snow, stakeholders in a new world economic order. Would Washington accept that, whichever administration?
I think it's inevitable. It's inevitable. We're realistic and we're pragmatic. The world is changing, but the one point I'd make here that I think needs to be emphasized, and you made it earlier, this is not a win-loss game. It's win-win. America benefits from a more prosperous China, a more prosperous India, a more prosperous sub-Saharan Africa. And we've encouraged it. We want to see it happen. And China and India are going to emerge as great world powers. It's going to be a long time, though, before per capita income in India or China rivals the West or rivals the United States. The sooner it gets there, the better. Because from the point of view of the U.S. and our exports, we'll be able to export more.
Let me end our discussion here in Davos by actually going to the next generation, because we do have some younger people, including someone from China, and I'm going to come across to you. Ken, can I just take your microphone? When you heard that description, you come from China, of a level of confidence in China of nuclear proportions, is that the way you feel as a teenager?
I'm not really sure about the power shifting to China. I actually agree with them up there. It's going to be a gradual process, but to young people in China, I think it means more opportunities for us.
I think that there's a lot of young South Africans listening to the debates going on in the world, and they're thinking, how do I fit in? And I think also the gentleman's point of how the people on the ground are dealing with these problems. It is so irrelevant to them, and I think that world leaders need to step up, especially in the developing world, and start talking to young people about it.
We spoke a lot here at this debate about the powerful middle class in India, but no one really spoke about the poverty levels in India. And
well, Kumi Naidu is here representing the poor.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is, India is moving forward, but are they going to take the poor along with them?
Mahatma Gandhi said, this planet has enough to meet all of humanity's need, but not all of humanity's greed. And we can only ensure that this world goes forward if we ensure sustainability is considered and we deal with the question of equality of people in rich and poor countries. Thank you.
Kumi Naidu, thank you. And can I thank all of you for joining us. We can't have a complete review of the economies around the world, every country, every region. But I hope what we have done with your valuable contributions is at least aired the dilemmas. And it's perhaps summed up by our Chinese representative who concluded that there was prudent optimism. There was a shake of the head and a nod on recession, downturn. We can't give you a final view, but at least you've got a sample of just how complex this week has been in the world economies. From me, Nick Gowing, and the BBC World Debate, thank you all for joining us. Bye-bye.